Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been a pernicious force in this world responsible for millions of deaths. Its teeth have wounded victims before modern times, before 9/11, before the Crusades, perhaps even before history itself. And if this force were called the name of any other disease, like malaria, this round would never even need to occur. But what we would put forth to you today is that the disease that we would cure is organized religion. We think it has been a pernicious force and one that we would correct. Just to be clear about what this debate is about, we think ultimately this is not about the existence of religious texts or whether or not spirituality itself would exist. The difference between the world of the government and the world of opposition is a world in which organizational, hierarchical structures of religious political power exist, and they do not on our side of the house. We think this makes our world better for a few different reasons. I'm going to first talk about persecution, then discuss religious conflict, then discuss why religion stifles societal growth, and then Nick will bring to you an argument why religion uniquely and particularly creates problems, not only in these three areas, but in aspects of other individual attempts to sort of live the good life. So the first thing I want to talk about is about the ideas of religious persecution and the ways that individuals have been harmed. Because when you have any organizational power structure, it creates in-groups and out-groups. And we shouldn't pretend that all nations that we would consider in this debate are liberal democracies. To be gay in Iran is to essentially not be able to live the life that you would prefer, or to live the life that you would need to in order to pursue your identity, for the simple reason that you live in a society that has an organized religious structure that says that your way of life is sin. No thank you. We think that ultimately, of course, persecution does occur in degrees. Not everyone is hung for blasphemy, though we think that harm is so significant that in and of itself it should be enough for this round, to be clear. We think that even simple stereotyping based on membership or out-group membership is essentially a simple enough problem that still exists on either side of the house. And what it creates is not just a problem for individuals who are members of minorities, but a problem for members of the religion itself. But before I move on, I'll take your point.
Don't you think organized religion has led to the most successful, widespread, and helpful cause of charity that has ever existed on the planet?
I think it's ridiculous to suggest that just because some religions are charitable, it is the case that in a world where these forces didn't exist, people would not be charitable. I think what they're failing to do is have creativity to analyze the two worlds they would exist. Human charitable impulse doesn't come from organized religion. People are not charitable because the Pope told them to be charitable. They are charitable because they have charitable impulses that don't disappear when an organized structure also disappears. What changes is who they're charitable to and who they feel loyalty to. Not just members of their own religion, but humanity broadly, which they forget on their side of the house. But they also forget that members of the religion, essentially, don't have a free choice to be there. That individuals in societies with strong organized religions are coerced. It is not just the fact that people outside the majority are harmed, but people who become members of the organized religion itself are pressured into being there. We think that this undermines their ability to actually choose for themselves what their religious beliefs would be, emphasizing the importance of the way religion would develop on our side of the house. But before we even talk about our next point, we don't think that this exists one-directionally from the half of the religious people persecuting other individuals. Because religion presents a societal structure that people are afraid of because it presents the threat of persecution and the threat of conflict, there's also persecution of individuals who are religious as well. We could look to, for example, France's treatment of individuals who believe that they should wear the burqa. We think ultimately what we get on either side of these questions is the undermining of persecution for people as a result of their religious beliefs or lack thereof. But the second thing I want to talk about is about conflict. Because we live in a world where people study in madrasas from the age of 5 to learn how to make bombs to kill other people. And they are told by their religion that this is something that they not only have to do, but that they need to do in order to actually live a good life or to go into heaven. But before I move on, I'll take your point.
Is it seriously your point that the reason that people are studying in madrasas to build bombs is inherent to Islam and not, maybe the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
So I think what they don't understand on their side of the house is that secular reasons for war are not always the easiest ones to get people behind. And that what religion actually is a motivating force to get people to engage in conflict, where they might either be willing to engage in compromise or work with other people. This is not just because of the in-group out-group effect that I've already talked about, but because essentially what religion does is make compromise a sin. The issue on their side of the house is not just about discussions about madrasas, but Orthodox Jews who believe that they can't give up the settlements because it is not only their God-given right, but if they did so, it would be a sin tantamount to killing their own son or killing their mother or not believing in the Ten Commandments. That is the absurdity that they have on their side of the house, when they don't fail to recognize that by making compromise a sin, these religious groups perpetuate the conflict. They make it easier to engage in conflict when there are other, less expensive, in terms of human life, ways in these groups and these conflicts could be resolved and pursued. The issue on their side of the house is that individually religious people now have incentives and reasons to engage in conflict when they otherwise would simply attempt to resolve it in the ways that secular people without these kind of crazy beliefs or crazy beliefs that other people essentially do. No thank you. Because individually religious people really believe that when another individual will go to hell, deserves to be punished, deserves to be harmed, they're willing to engage in greater punishment of these individuals and greater and less restricted conflict than would ever exist between what we think would be two secular nations or two otherwise religious structures. But the final thing I want to talk about is why it stifles societal growth, which we think is an additional severe enough problem to warrant our belief in this motion. We think that power structures, when they exist in the way that religions do, exist to self-perpetuate. They resist change because the traditions that give them power and give them control of other people precisely lose their strength when they become significantly different. What essentially it means is that any religion that already has existing power will never give it up and will certainly not try to enable progressive movements. We think people celebrate, for example, the Pope's new views without realizing that in a world where religion didn't occur, these would not be new views and we wouldn't need to celebrate these kind of things because everyone would believe them because it wasn't told from birth, essentially, that this was such a sin. The reason why people oppose these kinds of rational policies that people like you and I agree in is simply because they are told from birth that if they don't, they will go to hell or that they will receive severe divine punishment. What it makes happen on their side of the house is that some things become sacred. We think that in a world where certain things are sacred, where you cannot make compromises, where you cannot weigh costs and benefits, because to do so, essentially, is to engage in a heretical act or to engage in blasphemy, is that people aren't willing to question or combat power structures that they have been raised in. What it means, essentially, is that it is much more difficult to engage in the kind of societal progressive growth that we think is necessary to actually develop and become a society where progress is not only possible, but likely. Because when people are unwilling not only to compromise, but to view other people as equal to themselves, because they have different beliefs, beliefs that they believe should be stifled, beliefs that they not only believe to be wrong, but the beliefs that they believe warrant persecution, we think it is much more difficult for them to ever even engage in discussion or engage in the progressive ideals that we think we can achieve on our side. So for those reasons, we think, not only do we undermine attempts at persecution, undermine the existence of conflict, but we promote existing societal growth by engaging people and making sure that they engage with the secular value calculus that all non-religious people, we think about. We are very proud to stand in opposition of religion and in promotion of our motion. We're very proud to propose.
Thank you for your speech, and I invite the Leader of Opposition to open the case for side up. Here.
Religion were malaria, proposition's right. We wouldn't be having this debate because if malaria had opened the first AIDS clinic when no one else was willing to touch an AIDS patient because we didn't know what it was, if malaria contributed more money to charity than any other organizational institution in the world, then you're right. Maybe we would have those debates. The reason that we talk about religion in this context is because we acknowledge that there are things that have happened that are bad. But I think what we need to look at is holistically, what does modern religion mean? I think that it's the easiest thing to blame for underlying political conflicts. That does not make it responsible. Let's talk about the principles these modern religions actually precipitate and why this actually matters. First, my constructive case, then my refutation. So why does religion benefit from these types of frameworks? I think that frameworks keep religions together, right? One of the reasons that the Catholic Church has been so successful at continuing to perpetuate itself is the fact that it manages to actually have a hierarchy that can perpetuate itself, create more communities, teach things like Sunday school, and it means that after one particular preacher or person in a community dies, that community doesn't die with them, right? The reason that you need these types of structures is to ensure that religion continues. I'm going to go on to the benefits of religion in just a second. But I think it's pretty clear that these communities come from sort of a broader organization, and this organization can then continue to make the religion happen. All right, so why does this actually matter? Because attending church together and being a part of this greater community encourages you to take better collective action. Not yet. What are these types of collective action that we're talking about? Listen, modern religions are based on one particular goal and one particular golden rule, right? Like do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And regardless of how certain people in fringe communities choose to bastardize that, I think the mainstream, large, modern, organized religions would all holistically get behind this very, very simple human principle that we can all agree is good for the betterment of society. I think that if anything, the case that proposition presents you is one of political turmoil, whereby certain parties have different interests in terms of borders and in terms of conflict. I think when you institute religion, it actually puts a tension in these conflicts, and that your Bible or your scripture tells you not to kill these people, yet you are. I think that this tension in and of itself is a good one, because it makes you think even more about what you are actually fighting for, right? Realize that insofar as you are actually putting something at the center of this, that makes you think twice before striking, because you are violating what is in the core of your text, it's important to consider what the impact of overall this religion actually is. When one country is invading upon another, I'm not suggesting that religion is going to manage to stop it. But I would also ask you to consider what that political regime would look like if it weren't for religion. Would it be significantly different? I don't think it would be, because it's individuals trying to protect their communities and trying to protect their land. This isn't perpetuated by their belief in God, it's perpetuated by their belief in autonomy. Those are two very different concepts. Proposition's going to have to tie them together to be able to win this round. I think what we do get from religion in a modern context is charity beyond our wildest dreams. Realize that one of the pillars of Islam is actually donating a significant portion of your income to charity. The reason that these charities get so much money and can do so much social good, and that individuals are willing to sacrifice what is in fact often in their own best interest to be a part of these types of organizations, is that they are believing in God. They are believing this is good for their salvation. They are believing that this is going to bring them to a better world. I think that the world that they try and paint you is one where religion is simply a force for war. I think far more of the time they are a force for charity, a force for good.
On that point.
I think we can all see that in our own lives, yeah.
Okay, but if you decide that the type of charity that a religion is practicing is somewhat problematic, and you want to point that out to the religion by, let's say, leaving a friendly note on the door of a church, that reception is not received in a friendly way. Its reception is received as labeling you as a heretic because you have attacked the voice of God, and then everyone who agrees with you is killed.
So if you write a note on the door of a church that attacks what is one of the pillars of that religion, I think then yes, you would be greeted as a heretic. I think that if you write a note on the door of that church and suggest that the way in which they do charity is not in line with your political beliefs, and you believe that there should be something different, these are the types of things that are discussed in Bible study, right? These are the types of conversations that happen within these organizations. And to suggest it doesn't is ridiculous. Like, even though the Catholic Church does have a highly hierarchical type system, there are still changes. There are institutional changes happening right now as we see, right? These are not organizations that are totally stagnant throughout all of history. We'd all be having very different belief codes if they were, right? Okay, so this is my last quick point of construction about what's actually good for the individual that comes out of religion. I think there's a feeling of salvation. There's a feeling of self-fulfillment. There's a feeling of actually being able to participate in a broader community and your life having a deeper, more important meaning. I think that all of these things encourage individuals to do things that are good for others and encourage people to live beyond their lives. I think there is a sense of calm, a sense of purpose, and a sense of actually being able to accomplish something in the world that you can never get without religion that actually works, religion that continues to perpetuate itself, and religions that create communities. Because it's these communities that lead people to believe there is this higher self-purpose that we think is a very important thing for self-fulfillment for many people. I also think it's important to consider the extent to which many of these beliefs actually keep a lot of people in line. And that sometimes if you are struck, it is your instinct to strike back, but it is actually in line with many moral codes to not strike back. I think that these cases aren't publicized, right? Because nobody's interested in the cause where the individual just sat down and didn't strike back on behalf of their religion. That doesn't mean they don't equally exist, Mr. Speaker. I think these are the types of instances that Proposition is going to continue to try to ignore, and it's very hard for us to point to case examples in which they happen. But we all know that insofar as these are the core tenets of these major religions, it is highly likely that lots of these people are in fact making good moral calculus that are good for society broadly because of these types of decisions. I will take the opening.
When it interests the people in power in a religion, maybe they'll tell people that they shouldn't strike back. Do you think this is more likely to be the case when there are feudal lords, where, for example, when they actually gave this commandment, or in the modern day and age when striking back might be in their interests?
Okay. I think that broadly when individuals don't strike back, even though it would be in their own best interest, it is on the basis of something. I think that basis is often religion. I think these are cases that are hard to point to because people don't look when people don't strike back. Okay. Quickly, the piece of refutation or to fix it. I think I've already dealt with this political idea about why it's not actually caused by, like some type of nebulous god. It's caused by like international conflicts that have other underlying principles. And this idea that people are going to do charity is just, true to an extent, and that some people will continue to do charity. But people will do way more charity when they think it's going to save their soul, and when they think there's something grander at the end of it, when they think that like giving 10% versus 5 is actually going to make a difference in their eternal salvation. I think that's why we see religious organizations at the center of so many of the major world charities. I also think it's really important to consider the types of things that that they try and argue that like some things become sacred, right? And that somehow then some things warrant persecution. I think that they're arguing for a regime of religion that is one of the past. And I'm not arguing that there aren't certain fringe religious groups that are part of these organizations that sometimes perpetuate those types of ideals. But I think broadly the principles upon which religion is based, and broadly the principles that we try and perpetuate in society, are a reflection of what these religions say. I think our societal values are getting better. I think the types of things that religions are trying to teach are improving. I think what we want to see is a world in which religion can continue to actually make good by providing things like charity, by providing things like respite for those who it would otherwise be not in their best interest to do so. We are very thankful for this.
Thank you for your speech. I now invite the Deputy Prime Minister to extend the possibilities. Here you go.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's quite clear that opposition only wants to talk about religion in modern liberal societies. We actually got the quote that when someone makes a complaint to the church, they'll have a Bible study about it and discuss whether it's good or bad. I'm sorry, this is a very new development in the discourse surrounding religion that only exists in certain societies, like the United States, like Canada, like England, and other modern liberal societies where there are rights protections. Bible studies did not exist in the Middle Ages when the Crusades were going on and people were literally killed for their religious beliefs. Bible studies still don't exist in theocracies in the Middle East, in which having another religious belief not only puts your stake in society, your position in society at peril, but your very life at peril. So I don't think we can just talk about religion in the context of a modern liberal society. We're talking about religion not only now in these bad societies, but across all of history. So I think that's why where we get a lot of the harms that they're talking about. So I first want to bring like a new argument, go through my substantive material about why we think that religion is fundamentally bad and creates irrational decisions, and then I'm going to go on to the rebuttal. So I think that religion is distinct from all other power structures for a very key reason. That is that your incentive calculus is changed. So you're no longer concerned about the consequences in the physical world. Instead, you've added this other element about the consequences in the world that exists after you've like left this physical world. So why is this uniquely bad? So first of all, your decision-making calculus still has all of the potency and veracity of a decision that you actually think is going to affect you in the future. Like, you actually think that your actions will directly affect you even when you leave the physical world. The problem is, it's probably not the case that that's true. So the other people have to suffer the consequences of that decision calculus. So what does this result in? This results in organized religion literally compelling people to strap bombs on themselves and blow themselves up, causing harm not only to like themselves, but also to a bunch of people around them and to society writ large. And yes, we agree. We don't think it might be, we definitely don't think it's endemic to like Islam as a religion, to Islam as a religious text. What it is endemic to is organized religion. On our side of the house, we can still have religious texts. We can still have people get all of the messages they're talking about, like it's good to give to charity, it's good not to strike back. What happens is these become fundamentally political organizations that are able to use religion in order to create all of these bad outcomes. So we agree. We don't think that it's justified in these religious texts most of the time, on like when you're reading it, to blow yourself up and to kill people. But we think that given that this is occurring on religious grounds, it's like proof that the organized religion is responsible for this type of thing if you believe their own argumentation. Sure.
But in a lot of these communities, actually, like it's the less organized, it's more fringe religious groups that actually engage in it. It's not like the Pope telling people to strap bombs to their chest.
And what we said was any organization that has a hierarchical structure, those fringe groups, they might be smaller, still organized religion. It's still an organization. So I think that's the problem with their advocacy. So what did we get from there? What are some of the argumentations that we got? So we said that we got, like the thrust of this, and I think this is also the POI that closing up asked, was like that you're going to give more to charity, which is good. So a few things here. First of all, I do think that there's a good reason why you would still have charitable giving in our side of the house. So I'm going to make the argument that you don't have to be religious to be a moral person. I might look at someone suffering, feel sorry for them, and decide to give to charity. I'd probably get that like might be like a justification. In fact, what we'd say is, if religion was less prevalent, there might be more of a focus on like philosophical teachings on why it's just good to be a moral person for secular reasons as well as religious reasons. But even if you don't buy that, again, these religious texts will still exist, right? So all the teachings they're talking about that compel people to give to charity are going to exist in our side of the house. But look, I think like often in debate rounds we try to pretend like it's going to be 100% the same. We're okay with there being marginally less charity given if we weigh that against all of the bad harms that religion has on these societies as a whole. In fact, what we would say is, oftentimes, a liberal society is connected to being a more prosperous society. So what we're saying here is that it's actually the case that religion can be a stifling force for economic development as well as social development because we think the two are tied together. So it'd actually be less of a demand for so much charitable giving if we didn't have organized religion stifling societies and causing poverty in these societies that are undeveloped. Sure.
Do you think we'd be more or less successful as a human race in combating challenges that cross over generations if we didn't conceptualize and think about what our life would mean once it was over?
I think people can be concerned with legacy all the time. I think that people don't leave money for their children just because they think that's going to be like get them into heaven, right? Like people leave money for their children because they actually care about like the future people. They can care about future people. They can care about future rights. I don't think it's the case that it's just religion. That religion is the only reason why people care about the future. I think that's just not a very good argument. So we get this argument that religion teaches the golden rule and the golden rule is good. Again, I think the problem is the way that religious texts are structured is that oftentimes you can emphasize different things, especially when you're coming from a certain position of power, right? So it might be the case that when you read the Bible as a whole, the overriding principle is this sort of golden rule. If you read the Quran, the overriding principle is the golden rule. The problem is, because religion is so endemic in a lot of these societies, and a lot of times the people who are talking about what should be emphasized are also in very powerful societal positions. People are not who have like not actually read the Bible or not actually read the religious text, which is like a lot of people in organized religion. Just listen to like what is being told to them by the power structures themselves. That's really pernicious because oftentimes the power structures don't just have these religious goals in mind, they have like political goals in mind. So that's why their response to our argument about conflict, I think, was woefully insufficient. Because the reason why conflict is more prevalent because of religion isn't because the religion itself promotes conflict, but because it's a lot easier for someone to convince someone to pick up a gun or to pick up a sword if you're telling them that this is God's will, that this is like bigger than yourself, that this is something that's going to help you after you leave the physical world. Those are all reasons why you can convince somebody that it's the just thing for you to do, not because it's actually going to be, not because it's actually endemic to that religion. Finally, this final argument is like better for the people themselves because you get this sense of calm and purpose. I think that's only good sometimes. Sometimes that purpose can be very bad. Sometimes that purpose can have pernicious effects on other people, and that's what we want to stop in our city house. This isn't only about religion in the United States or in England where we can talk about it rationally. It's about the societies where people suffer every day. We're very proud to propose.
Thank you for your speech. I now invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to extend the negative matter. Here you go.
It's sort of interesting that the first thing that we get out of the Deputy Prime Minister in response to my partner's case is the accusation that we aren't thinking about religion holistically, and that we're talking about a religion that only exists in liberal and secular societies, and aren't talking about the broader picture. Yet the example he gives of the things that religion has caused and the actual impacts it has had on society are examples of people growing up in madrasas and strapping bombs to their chests. As if this is a good holistic picture of what religions have done, and then dismisses all of the actual stuff that Victoria gives to you about charity, about community, about structures, and just does not actually engage with those types of benefits besides saying they would exist anyways. I think that that's largely a huge problem with their case. I have 5 points of refutation I'm going to get into, do a little bit of rebuilding of Vic's stuff, because I think that a lot of it still stands. Most of the speech will be refutation. So, first of all, what do we get from them? We hear that individuals don't meaningfully choose or opt into these types of communities, and as a result, they're coercive and they're problematic. So first of all, I know that they don't actually give any analysis to say why opting into this community necessarily means, not opting into this community necessarily means that it actually is harmful. I'd suggest to you that I don't opt into being born in the middle of nowhere in Ontario, but there's probably benefits that have accrued to me through those types of communities. And I'd also say that they also understate the amount of choice that people have in the majority of religious contexts. We're not going to say that every person has a free religious choice all the time to exit their community, but I'd suggest to you that that you do have some level of actual ability to choose these types of things. For instance, in Catholicism, to decide to go your own way after after a certain amount of time, or to basically try to break off and forge your own path. The difference on their side of the house is that religion doesn't exist in the same way, because Victoria gives you all of this analysis about how religion doesn't perpetuate or continue without these types of organizational structures, right? It isn't sufficient for Nick to say, well, we still have religious texts and religion on our side of the house, when Nick gives you literally 2 minutes of analysis talking to you about why that stuff disappears when you don't have the communal frameworks and the legacy that comes along with it, right? They don't get, I think that's actually sufficient refutation to what we hear. They also say that, and this is probably one of their more absurd points, I think, that it leads to finite and absolute appeals to authority, that you can't question church practice, that you're a heretic if you question anything that the church does, and that there's a lack of rationality with engagement. So first of all, doubt is a huge part of a lot of religions, and it's encouraged in many cases that you actually question and that it's normal to be in those types of situations. So this is a huge mischaracterization of a large number of religions. But I'd also suggest to you that this is the same as a lot of different types of frameworks that people opt into, whether they be political or religious. One of the biggest problems that I think that there is with side government's case is that they assume a world without religion is one where people no longer have the desire or the will to try and find replacements, right? Because I'd suggest to you that one of the appeals of the type of religion that they talk about, which I'd suggest to you is not the vast majority of religion, is this idea of having a codified and very simple type of guideline to live by. So those types of people will probably just find Randian objectivism or something like that and basically live their lives in that type of way. That type of structured type of life doesn't go away. But on our side of the house, we have communities like the Catholic Church or like Islam, where you have a large group of people dedicated to a common purpose and actually having meaningful things in common with each other that I don't think happens to the same extent on their side of the house. Sure. You're only standing.
All right. The evangelical organization World Vision recently had to rescind their decision to allow gay members to serve as part of their administration because they lost almost 2,000 sponsors in a 3-day period. People don't care about charity in the abstract. They care about charity when it's for a specific purpose, and when the charity contradicts that purpose, they give up.
So this gets me right on to the next point of refutation, so this works well, where they say, listen, religion doesn't make people moral and considerate. Maybe there'd be more philosophical contemplation, and that would replace people's charitable donations. So I think it's right for Vic to point out that it's not coincidence that, for instance, Catholics in the United States were the first ones to open up AIDS clinics and put themselves into some actual type of risk because they were concerned about the afterlife or the people around them in a type of situation that not all other types of people were. But second of all, I'd suggest to you that if it's the case that religion doesn't just make you naturally a moral and considerate person, I question all of Gov's substantive material. Because if religion doesn't convince you to do these other things that we say and are part of the Bible and are structured, then why on earth are we supposed to believe that it does any of the stuff that Gov talks about, like hate people irrationally and post things on the church door? Because apparently Gov wants to have a world where you definitely believe all the bad things in religion and the things that they don't like, but all of that good stuff, you don't pay attention to that because, listen, you're gonna have that anyways with Kant. I don't think that's a realistic way to actually think about these types of things. But the second response that I have to this is that one of the benefits of religion and being able to actually see these types of benefits is the communal structure and pressure that comes with a group and a philosophy that says there are consequences to your actions beyond the merely physical ones that accrue to you right now, right? Insofar as you, A, know that you have a lot of people who are acting in a similar way to you, and B, that there are maybe metaphysical consequences to your actions, I think that makes you think differently than you otherwise would. So yeah, there's probably still charity on their side of the house, but I think that if you're an individual who is probably a little more selfish or a little more predisposed to not care about other people in the room, then you are more likely to be a good person on our paradigm because there is selfish interest there that is both from the communal structures and from religious creed. I think that's really important. I'll take the first half now.
The reason why people are charitable in religious power structures is because the people in power tell them that they should be charitable. But on net, do you think that the incentives of the people in power in religions are to help other people who aren't members of their religion or to protect their own power?
Yeah. Last point of refutation, because they say that hierarchy causes stifled societal progress and tyranny and that religious leaders are acting in their own self-interest. So like, I am very confused why anyone opts in to the incredibly low pay and basically like, in a lot of religious situations, non-existence of power or any type of physical attractions, if they really are the type of people that they are talking about who are really concerned about, you know, like having dominion over all types of other people. I think that if, for instance, Pope Francis was concerned, as they say, about actually acting in this type of mechanism, he probably wouldn't be washing the feet of Muslim women. He would be trying to do a feudalistic type of, like, old type of regime. I don't think this is natural to modern religion. I think that's a problem for them. So what does Vic tell you in terms of her substantive material and what engagement does it get so far? So in terms of religion and organization, we tell you that collective action and the mere existence of religion doesn't exist to the same extent on their side of the house, because one of them is much abetted by the other. The only response that we get to this ever is the assertion that things will still exist. And yes, it might be true that there will be disjointed groups, Mr. Speaker, but I think you have to ask yourself, which groups more likely survive, and which world is religion more of a force? We say it's ours, we're proud to oppose.
Thank you for your speech. That moves us to the back half of the debate. We now have a member of government to discuss about this matter. Here.
What Drew and I like about a secular liberal society is that it leaves it up to the individual to choose what is the most important structure to them. And what we feel that an organized religion in particular does is it defaults to that structure being the most important thing in an individual's conscience. And that's what we oppose generally. We think that liberal societies do best at maximizing freedom, and we think that is what we get best on our side. So I'm going to, I want to respond first to the arguments we got from the other side. So first of all, like, the whole government case is that, our huge impact of it is that organized religion facilitates charity, so therefore organized religion is automatically good, and therefore that, like, should, like, somehow, I think, win, like, the biggest impact in the round. Like, it's unclear to me that the biggest impact that we get from organized religion is people going off and giving loads of money to, like, charitable organizations. Because, first of all, a lot of people who, like, give money for religious reasons don't give money to people, they give it back to the church, because they think that by giving money back to the church, that helps their position in heaven. Like, that is, like, what Catholicism does. People give back money to the church, not to these charitable organizations. We think, moreover, that, like, if it's such a concern that people aren't spending enough money to, like, solve world hunger or world poverty, it's probably a fault of, like, state organizations or other state institutions. And if, like, that is a legitimate issue, we feel that it's better to have a secular state, like, enforcing its beliefs about, like, humanism, as opposed to, like, a religious organization leaving it up to individuals to be like, okay, we think it's, like, morally good for you to, like, give money, because or, like, not even morally good, but, like, if you don't give charity, you're going to hell. Like, that is, like, quite coercive, and we think, like, that's not necessarily a good psychological position for people to be in, because it makes them feel, like, quite bad. So I don't really think that, like, this, like, charity idea, like, is, like, such a huge point. And moreover, like, the idea that charity would just, like, go away all of a sudden when people aren't religious. Like, most of European society, like, is, like, becoming more secular, and there's still charity. So to say, like, a world without religion is a world without charity is, like, empirically false. Like, it's just not true. No, thank you. I'm sorry. And then their other argument is, like, basically, without religion, or organized religion, religion will, like, the benefits we get from religion, things like community and other good things that are derived from religion will kind of just die out, and, like, that's bad. Well, people live in communities and find, like, mutual, like, likings, like, sports, or, like, they, like, join art groups, or, like, there's other aspects of civil society that often fulfill those community, like, type values that they're saying only comes from religion. But what I'm saying is that, like, that comes from lots of different things, and we prefer to have, like, those things because, like, they fulfill the same roles without, like, the coercive power that religion can often have. So we think that's bad. Also, they talk about, like, how this undermines violence, that, like, when you have a religious world, like, it means people might engage in less violence. Like, that's not true, because you can get around text really easily. Like, even, like, the concept of jihad, like, is a concept taken from a religious text, and people, like, are often willing to die for, like, a religion. We think that that is specifically taken from religion. No, thank you, not at this time. Right. So that's, like, basically their whole case. Like, religion brings charity, and so therefore we should preserve it, but I just told you, like, it doesn't just bring charity. So, and then like the whole thing about like, oh, religion's the only way people can act as community, that's like not true. But like, what is, I want to be very clear about what means you think a world without organized religion is, because I don't think it's really been clear in the round. Like, what does that actually look like? And I think what that actually looks at is a world like maybe where people just, maybe there isn't necessarily text, or maybe there is definitely not a Catholic Church, there is no hierarchy, there is no mass mobilization. So like the characteristic aspects of these, I'll take you after this point. So the characteristic aspects of organized religion is it has these hierarchies, it has these texts, has these mass mobilizations. And like a world without religion, you can believe in God, you can like have spiritual feelings within yourself, you just don't like do it because someone else told you, and you don't do it because like a text told you. It's like more free, and like you decide those things on your own, which is something that we prefer. Back half.
So sometimes religion can coerce you, sometimes the state can coerce you. Isn't it good to have competitions between the institutions that are trying to coerce people?
That's exactly the problem we have, because we feel it's not a fair competition when you have religion in this context. But here is why. Because the liberal society presupposes the idea that you have to have multiple different views, that like you can debate things, and that things can't be challenged, that things that can be challenged. And that's what's really important about the liberal secular society, that the religious institutions don't necessarily preserve. And that's why we think you get more freedom on our side, because people, like, within these contexts, need to be able to debate things and need to be able to like decide these issues. But the problem is you can't like say to like the Pope or whoever, like, we don't agree with this, and if like, well, I mean you can, but like likely you'll be shot down because it's within these texts, it's within these tenets. And that's because that like it has the hierarchical nature, and because they can just tell you that, it stifles debate, and people automatically default to these things. And also when you attack one part of the religion, it's not a fair debate, because it's like, oh, you're just attacking the entire Catholic religion. So we say, oh, like, you can't be gay or whatever. It's like, oh, you're just anti-Catholic, which stifles the debate. And I think that's bad, because it means that like it's totalizing. And I'll take front half.
If it is so true that you can't get away with hierarchical critiques to the religion without being viewed as a heretic or someone who's critiquing Catholicism at large, then why is there so much debate in every religion about their own tenets, and which tenets apply philosophically and which tenets apply literally?
We think like there are debates within a religion, but it's hard if you are born into a particular religion and that is what you are told is like the particular thought, and whether or not you're going to hell or heaven is decided upon that. It's really hard as an individual person to make that choice or to like follow other debates, because your life is literally perceived to be at stake, and so it's not a fair debate, and that's what we think. But now I want to give you particular examples of how these organized religions have caste systems in India, like the subjugation of tons of hundreds of thousands of people, like that happened because of the organized structural aspects of Hinduism. We think it was really hard for people to challenge that. Calvinism, predestination, like people think that they are going to heaven or hell, and in those particular situations, people don't give charity or they don't do good things because they already know that they're going to heaven or to hell. And so they're not called upon to do good things like opening opposition said, because if I already know that I'm going to heaven, I have no incentive to give charity, I have no incentive to do anything. Or if I'm going to hell, I'm not going to try to necessarily make the world better because I'm already screwed over. We think those are the type of structures that have actually persisted in existence in societies. Casteism, Calvinism, also things like political Islam. Lots of leaders can use it as an instrument to codify their own legitimacy, because they can be like, the religious text says that this is true, and as a mass population who like also follows that religion, hard to challenge that confers their power and makes it easier for them to be. So because all these examples, we think that organized religion has actually done more good.
Thank you for your speech, and I'll invite the member of opposition to open the case for lower half.
Okay, maybe so.
Iron Man.
Okay. Sit down. Mr. Speaker, we asked the government bench whether charity or people caring about future generations would exist without religion. And they said probably, and well, maybe, Mr. Speaker, they would exist without religion. But then it wasn't clear to us why hate and violence wouldn't exist without religion. And so this debate has actually been paralysed by a kind of symmetrical assertiveness about the extent to which particular values generate innately, or they come from institutions that put ideologies around us that make us be charitable or make us be hateful. So the first thing I'm going to do in this extension is to show why the attempts by the government bench to say that religion did that better, or made people hate people better, or were more coercive, failed. That essentially there's an innate incentive for all individuals to sign up to ideologies that create in-groups and out-groups, that give them a right to oppress others and to share resources within that group. The second thing I'm going to say is that insofar as that's true, we prefer a world with religion, because that's a non-state institution that is engaging in that coercion. And the competition between state institutions of coercion and non-state institutions of coercion is incredibly productive. To that first question of why we think that resentment is innate, we think that in a finite world, where there are certain economic and geographic resources that you want to control and not necessarily share with everyone, but recognise that fighting man against man or woman against woman for those resources doesn't make sense, you form in-groups that will help you share that resources between them, that will take care of you when you're sick, but will also protect your resources from a wider group of people who are called the out-groups. Now, that could exist without religion. We think that in societies that they talk about that are increasingly secularizing, it does in that case. But it still requires an organizing principle. Because that kind of game theoretical strategic negotiation of who we ally ourselves with and who we're allied against can't happen every day. Instead, we create neighborhoods and assign those neighborhoods identities and start calling them nations. And we think those states then are the ideologies that give us a reason to share resources among some people and not with others. This might be a reason why we would support nationalism or not. We think that there are two case studies in this debate where I can show you how this has happened in the recent world. Let's look at post-colonial states in Africa. I mean, 20 years after decolonisation, we had states protecting territory from other states. They had a sense of themselves as being Nigeria, where previously for centuries there was no such thing as Nigeria. There was no reason why you couldn't let the Biafrans have their own kingdom. That shows that once you give people access to this sense of in-group, they're going to defend it anyway, even though this ideology came from an imperial culture they resisted and hated. Let's look at humanitarian interventions. In the past, people invaded maybe in the name of religion. We colonized Africa because we wanted to make them more Christian. Now we invade countries because we want to make them more humanitarian. Now it shows you how an ideology of human rights that has only existed for a few decades and originated from one of the most pacifistic bodies in the history of the world, the United Nations, can be co-opted by the innate desire of human beings to control assets amongst an in-group against an out-group, and that's been co-opted to successfully support war, invasion, and hate around the world. How did the opposition say religion is different or better at creating these in-groups and out-groups? They said at opening government that it's because it makes you think about the afterlife, and so it's not just the present world that they can use to coerce you, but the afterlife as well. We asked them a point of information about whether then people would ever care about policy intergenerationally. And they said, of course they would, because people who are secular or atheistic still care about the future and their future affiliations and their future communities. That's precisely our point. Some people join the Israeli Defense Force because they are Jewish and believe in God, but in fact the most religious people in that state don't join the Israeli Defense Force at all. Some people join the IDF because they believe this land is theirs, they believe it belongs to them and their children and their children's children. You can be motivated not just by the future, but also by the past. You can kill because your ancestors were killed. We think these are equal ways in which narratives that aren't necessarily locked into the present can be used by states to create terror and war as well. Open.
So the difference is the intensity of your defense. If you're a legacy, like when you, your spiritual world, after you leave the physical world, you have to think of something is actually going to happen to you. A legacy is just something you realize isn't going to happen and affect you in any meaningful way after you leave the physical world. That's the difference.
But that's also true about legacies of charity and legacies of humanitarianism and positivity as well, that churches and religious groups also encourage. Our point in this debate is that this intensity argument actually varies across the cases of religions and across the cases of states. Some religions start madrasas, others start charities. Some states are benevolent, other states are totalitarian. It's not necessarily the character of being a state coercive body or a non-state coercive body, it's how you choose to use that ideology that indicates the character or the strength and intensity of your oppression. Iran has a hatefulness against homosexuality because of Islam, but also just because they're a totalitarian or authoritarian state. There are state bases there of that oppression, there are non-state bases as well, because there are state advantages to oppressing minorities. Okay, so no thank you. Why do we think that this is likely to lead to this leads me on to my second extension as well, which is that in a world where we have states that oppress people, a world that would still exist without organised religion, it's better to have non-state actors as well that can operate within that state, but also subtly oppose it. No, thank you. So we think the biggest way of making the true is providing hope. For most of human history, humanity was immiserated, living in utter poverty, controlled by the state, with a king that had control over your life. Religion gave you hope to exist beyond that state. It meant that if the state was oppressing you in particular and disagreed with you, you had a different moral vision and different moral community support.
Damn.
It just provides a different moral vision, like a different way of thinking about who you should care about and why you should care about them. So for instance, in Texas, very conservative society, but the one thing pushing against the state message for the death penalty is religion. Religion is saying, well, maybe we shouldn't have the death penalty. And this brings me to the closing government's case in this debate, because when I asked this in a point of information about why you might want competition between the visions of state coerciveness and non-state coerciveness, they said, well, but in liberal societies there are various competing versions. Well, first of all, it's interesting that opening government's case was in madrasas and closing government's case is in these perfect liberal societies. But second of all, one thing that liberal societies don't get you to choose is not to be liberal. Like, we think that religion providing a different moral vision on where life begins in societies that are very liberal and permissive and support abortion is a relevant way that they provide a different moral vision. But there's other factors about religion that are useful as well. Like under civil rights, when the state is oppressing you, you can go to your church, and that can be an organising and informational coercive structure within that society. Now, some churches supported segregation, some churches opposed it, but there was an oppositional view to the dominant public space which was controlled by the state. And let's not make no mistake about it. They use similar means. They use doctrines, they use creeds, they build schools to educate people. You have madrasas, we have like coercive public education systems as well that set particularly strict curriculums. The difference with this system is that it's transnational, that it provides a counterweight to the state and a different moral vision. And we think in the context of a world with coercion, that's an incredibly relevant thing. Because even if all we show on our side is that coercion would exist as well, we still win, because the burden on the prop team is to show that the world would be actively better. And for that reason, we're very proud to propose.
Thank you for your speech, and I'll invite the government whip to summarize the government bench.
Is it coming back? I feel like
I don't know.
making a speech without.
Do you want me to just go see if it's
Yeah,
okay?
great. I'd be fine taking like 1 minute, yeah.
Okay,
Great.
I'll take 1 minute.
This is going to be really good, so he's got a lot to respond to. It's just my concern.
Just have to make up all the things that Mariel said.
Yeah. Mariel had 9 points of substantive.
Right.
That needed robust.
Rebuttal.
I'm not entirely sure why Marielle started talking about robots, but...
When she started dancing like that, it was crazy.
What? It's a joke, Mary.
Welcome to my world. Alright, everyone ready?
Yeah, thanks.
The last figure tells us that for most of human history, people labored under kings who ruled them or existed under systems like caste systems. What he neglects to tell you is that king's right to rule was divinely ordained, that the systems people lived in overwhelmingly were justified because the person in charge said, the reason I'm in charge is because God likes me more than you. That's bad, and we don't like that on our side of the house. We recognize that people need to live in some extent of a coercive system. We just think that the religious superstructure is a worse coercive system and a more difficult coercive system to change than the systems of rational society, which we think people would have opted into. We think that is the comparative that this debate falls on, is whether which system is less coercive, which system would provide, as again, by pointing to the board too, that sort of better world. So I'm going to crystallize this debate in 2 ways. First, I'm going to ask why the religious superstructure is inherently worse than alternate systems, particularly rationalist society, and second, I'll explain what the world looks like absent organized religion, why that's better, why we have better debates, why we have better changes, why we have more progress. Before that, rebuttal. First of all, to clear up the issue of charity, like this side thinks that charity is one of the major goods of religion. 4 responses. 1, you are sometimes charitable in a very specific way. The reason why the Catholic Church is one of the largest private landowners in the world is because lots of people, in their wills, gave the Catholic Church their land, because that fulfilled their charity. I'm about to die, I need to do something charitable, Catholic Church, take my land. That fulfills charity. Second of all, it's very conditional. They didn't respond at all to my point that the charity world vision, which provides child sponsorships to children in developing countries around the world, recently decided that they were going to allow people who were in gay marriages to serve as part of their administrative board. The day they did that, hundreds of people dropped out, said, I don't care about the child I've been sponsoring. I care about my particular agenda, which is anti-homosexual. So much so that World Vision reversed its opinion and stopped letting those gay individuals be members. They didn't care about the kids who were going to no longer be sponsored. They just cared about their particular ideology. That's a problem. Third, there are externalities that occur from these things. The religions particularly preach things like, not allowing contraception, non-abortion, things that might be bad in many countries. So thank you. And finally, we think we still get it. As Mariel tells you, states can provide things through taxation, through social services. We think it's the role of the state in many cases to facilitate these needs. We'd have more ease of doing that. We didn't have to compete with people's charities, and people feeling like, well, I already gave money to like my particular group. I don't have to care about everyone else. That's bad. Second of all, moral actions and legacy. First of all, we tell you that in many cases, no thank you, people decide their moral actions, like in the instance of caste. Like people think that they don't have to do certain moral actions, they don't have to change the world, because the reason why they're in the world the way they are now is because of the religious system they existed. If you are like a really poor person living in India, you might think the reason why you're there is not because of socioeconomic problems that you need to change, it's because you were a bad person in a previous life, sucks to be you. Same thing if you happen to be a Calvinist, you can't do anything about it, predestination. People can care about their legacy for like perfectly rational reasons. We think people still would. No, thank you. Third, colonialism versus humanitarianism. Easy answer. Humanitarianism is good. Like we're telling people you should stop killing people in your country. You should have better laws for women in your country. We justify them on objective standards of being better for people. Just saying you ought to be Christian is not objectively better. It's in fact bad, causes cognitive dissonance in people, causes violence. That is wrong. And fourth, in the example of the IDF example, like what about Israel? What about the people who want to fight? Like he says the Hasidim don't fight. No, they vote. And when they vote, they say Israel is the chosen land, is the land for the Jews. It can never compromise on issues that are Palestinian. Whereas when you have moderate groups like Yesh Atid, the more liberal party in Israel, they don't have the same sort of purely aggressively organized religious stance. They're more willing to compromise on issues like the Gaza Strip or the West Bank. Sure.
Hey, wait, but these are both organized religions which disagree, and one of which you're admitting does.
No, Yesh Atid is a political party in Israel, but not an organized religion. Yesh Atid is a moderate political party. The Hasidim are part of an organized religion, which is the ultra-Orthodox party, which is explicitly tied to the Orthodox Church in Israel, organized groups. No, like, I think it's worse when those individuals, when an IDF soldier who is not religious can say, maybe I don't want to be doing these things because I don't have the idea that I'm a chosen person needing to do these things. That's bad. Okay, why is religious superstructure inherently worse than alternate systems? What we tell you is that we recognize that people are likely to organize themselves. They're likely to decide that they want to collectivize. They're likely to decide they need to arbitrate decisions with some sort of collective process. We think out of that emerges some degree of rationalist discourse. What's the difference between that and religion? We think that in religion, like you have a presupposition that a certain aspect of yourself is absolute. No, thank you. That if you are a Catholic person, your first obligation is to other Catholics, is to the Catholic Church. If you are a member of that religion, your first obligation is to them. No, thank you. In a liberal society, you recognize that people are members of lots of different groups. You can preference those groups based on what's most important for you now. Moreover, you can critique things that are happening in that rational society. When I asked the POI about taping things to the church, that was like I thought a very obvious reference to Martin Luther, right? When Martin Luther nailed 96 Theses to the door, like it wasn't like people were like, oh, that's a good point. You labeled them really well and used bullet points. Thank you for making it clear. They were like, you are a heretic and you are wrong, and I'm not going to read what you have to say. I don't care that you think indulgences might be a problem. I don't care that the Catholic Church is just like gaining benefits and violating all of their core tenets, because you are our enemy now, and that led to hundreds of years of strife and violence. Because if you disagree in a religious context, you are wrong. You have attacked the entire religion. Whereas if you disagree over a particular policy in a rational society, you have to give reasons why that's the case, and someone defending it cannot simply say because God said so is their reason for that. That's more problematic. That's worse. We recognize that people are not singular in a secular society, whereas in religious societies, certain aspects of yourself must come above others because they carry the weight of God and they carry the weight of post-life metaphysical action, and that's bad. Okay? What would the world look like, no thank you, absent an organized religion? Because this is really what this debate's around. And I'll take you before I get to that point.
On your point about world vision, New Zealand only gives development aid to communities that practice contraceptives, including access to abortion. Isn't that a form of ideological coercion through aid?
Yeah, it's just objectively better though, and I'm fine with it, because providing contraception means objectively that women are less likely to have children, which means they're likely to wait longer before they have children. When they do have children, they have fewer children. That's better for the economies of developing countries in the long term. It is objectively quantifiable, as opposed to just saying, I don't want this to happen because God said so, and then people decide that it might be worse for those people. I'm fine with that. What happens when you are absent these sorts of religious things and organized political stations? Like, one, you're more free you're more free to critique that religion in a way that is, or critique things that are happening and the way in and out groups function in a way that can lead to different change. This side says that in and out groups are still going to be formed. Let's say you don't you're talking about the issue of anti-homosexuality. You might still not be opposed to homosexuals without organized religion because they're different, because their sexuality is not the majority of sexuality. However, if that person says, I'm a person like you, why do you hate me for the people who I love? and you don't have God to fall back on, you just have your logic and your reason to fall back on, it's far more difficult for you to say, because I don't like you and it's more difficult with these other things, because that person can use the rational structures to support themselves. When instead you can say, I don't like you because it says in Leviticus that I'm allowed to not like you, that means that that individual is far more likely to keep those beliefs and not change their beliefs. That's bad for society. That means that those in and out groups stay in the ways they are, because some people are the chosen people, some people are the people who are always in an in group, and the people who are in out group are always in the out group. We think there still might be ethnic conflict, there still might be violence, but there wouldn't be religious violence. There wouldn't be violence by or religious persecution of those individuals. That's a harm that exists uniquely in a world that has organized religion. We think the world is a more amenable world, it's a more flexible world, it's a world that's better for everyone. Get rid of organized religion, or it'd be better if it didn't happen.
Thanks for your speech. Now for the last speech for the debate, can I please the opposition with?
Here.
Mr. Speaker, what we've shown you in extension is that there's nothing better about the way in which the state pushes its ideas upon people, and nothing better about the way in which states have conflicts over ideology, because the way that the state messages that is in a coercive, dogmatic way that's impossible to escape from, that provides even fewer choices that people can have between different forms of identity. What we tell you is that religion provides a countervailing narrative to that state. It provides you other choices and other ways to understand the world. It provides you a way to understand the common humanity of people outside the borders of your state. It provides you another way to understand and measure the success of that state, as opposed to what it told you in its religious schools, in which it told you that you needed to be a productive worker, and that your conceptualization of how you should manage your reproductive health is through contraception, as the government whip would tell you. An alternate conceptualization of that, an alternate message about how you ought to live your life, is exactly the type of liberalism that the closing government should have sought in this debate, and it's the type of liberalism that we tell you at closing opposition is facilitated and improved by the presence of organised religion. So I'm going to firstly talk about the clash that's happening in the back half, which is about really putting a test upon whether or not religion does something different to the other types of structures that exist within our world, and in particular, whether or not it provides net benefit when we compare it to those, and what a world would look like without it. Then what I'm going to do is take a step back and look at what happened in the opening half, which was essentially a debate about causation. Is it true that religion causes the harms that have been ascribed to it, or is it true that it causes the benefits that we'd like to ascribe to it? And we'll examine why, at the end of that analysis, when you narrow it down and look at what is actually causing the types of behaviours claimed by both teams, it's the reasons that we give you at closing of that causative relationship comes out in favour of the better elements, and that there are other things that more persuasively explain the things that we'd like to avoid about religious behaviour, or behaviour of religious people, I should say. The state fails political minorities in ways that are far more pernicious than the ways in which religions do. Why is that? Because without the insight that religion has provided to the way in which we conceptualize ourselves, we wouldn't see ourselves as an end. We'd see ourselves as a means towards state goals. What religion does differently to the way every other political structure organizes is it says individuals themselves have some value that you can't ascribe according to some purpose that's determined in an election. It can't be ascribed according to some goal that the king puts forward. It can't be ascribed according to some sort of inheritance structure. What it can be prescribed by is a kind of supernatural power that says that people themselves are not means to an ends, but are an ends in and of themselves. And in fact, that ends is the same across all of humanity. And that commonality and that reluctance to be able to use people expeditiously for your own political goals is what means that religions are always going to be less likely than states to exploit people, always less likely to allow certain groups within that society to be more dominant. What the government whip wants, right, is his objectivity to prevail about how we should go about calculating what's best for reproductive health. And I find it quite persuasive. But I also think that if he likes liberalism, he wants a challenging narrative to that conceptualization. Not a government that tells children that in its schools. Not a government that would exist absent the types of powerful institutions that are able to put forward a countervailing narrative. And it might be true that religion loses that fight, and that might be a good thing. But the other fights that religion has pushed upon the states, to get the state to conceptualize people for their common humanity, to get the state to recognize that its borders and members of its national groups aren't necessarily the only thing that's relevant when we consider whether or not somebody is worthwhile. What the closing opposition tells us is that religion stops flexibility and denies you freedom to construct, or at least more choices to construct, about your identity. But we don't think it's as hard as they tell you to change or to construct or influence your own religion. There is flexibility within religious faiths and a capacity to be able to move between them. And in no more inflexible ways than it is that people are much less likely to change their class identity, or much less likely to be able to change their political ideology that their parents had given them, or rather change their nationalist identity that has been given to them throughout a course of history education in public schools. We think all of those things are equally hard to change and constrain, and religion is an important countervailing attitude to that, and a challenge to that, and we think that's why it's better. We can't just assume, as the government bench wants to, that absent religion, people would suddenly start reading just war theory and adopt that as their perspective on the world. We think that while religion isn't the most perfect ideology, it's an ideology and a way of thinking about the world that improves the way people deal with one another, and on net, that's a benefit. These guys can't hope that we all suddenly become the kinds of people that are nice to one another. We already have a system that does that. It is religion. Yes, sir.
Okay, if you and I want to decide whether the state ought to advocate for something like contraception or something like homosexual rights, you give reasons, I give reasons. If we throw religion in the mix, I give reasons, you put your fingers in your ears and go, la la la, God doesn't like it.
That might be true, and you'll start talking to people who don't put fingers in their ear and say la la la. You'll persuade them, we'll have an election, and the state's policy will be there. The best bit about that is that I can still have my conceptualization of the world that the next time we might want to have a conversation, we'll do that. But also, that's a ridiculous way to characterize how religious people engage in a discussion, right? That's absolutely not the way that people go about thinking about their ideas. It's a really kind of like naive assumption from a bunch of debaters that that is the process of analysis. That there isn't some core elements to our ideologies that inform the way in which we have conversations. For example, this very structure itself, and we think that that's necessarily better, right? The idea that you can have dogma that informs the way you view the world, and that necessarily makes you impossible to talk to, or doesn't mean that you don't listen to other people, doesn't mean that that process of negotiation is necessarily bad. Okay, let's talk about the opening half of the debate, and this causative question. What the opening government tells you is that this makes people hateful and violent. And I think that's empirically or quantitatively borne out by the evidence. The Hasidim are a tiny minority of the Israeli population, a tiny minority of the voters within that area. Why is it that they're able to control that? Maybe it has something to do with the territorial integrity and security of the Israeli state that motivates a majority of people within the elections. Terrorists are a tiny proportion of people who happen to also coincide with people who are members of the Islamic faith. Why are we even talking about them versus the millions of people who don't engage in that type of violence, who do give a huge amount of charity? I think all of that quantitative question falls to the opposition side of the bench. But to suggest that religion is an othering force unique on this planet is truly bizarre. In fact, modern religion, we tell you in extension, is anti-schismatic. It wants its people to stay together. It wants to maximize the number of people within its religions. It wants to appeal and present itself as being as inclusive and large as possible. That's why it's important for it to avoid people branching off from its own religion and starting different sects within it, because it wants to be able to maintain that cohesiveness. The notion that because you care about the afterlife means you'll necessarily do evil things to preserve your membership in the afterlife also doesn't make much sense. It's just as likely to make you do good things, right? The only thing that changes is a desire to achieve something that goes into the future. Violent people will think that violence is a good thing to do to achieve something into the future. Non-violent people will do things like solve climate change or improve poverty. We think either way, that's an important way in which to view the world, and the vast majority of people do that for good, and that's why we think organized religion is beneficial.